"You're too sensitive, Mom." Those 4 words shattered my world more than any scream ever could. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to tell these stories. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 79 years old, and I live in a small apartment overlooking Lake Michigan in Chicago. The morning light filters through my kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor where I've stood countless times, making coffee for visitors who rarely came, preparing meals for family gatherings that slowly dwindled to nothing. I'm wearing my favorite blue cardigan today, the one my late husband Richard bought me for our 40th anniversary. It's got a small hole near the left elbow, but I can't bring myself to throw it away. Some things become too precious to discard, even when they're falling apart. My hands shake slightly as I pour the coffee, arthritis making even simple tasks a reminder of time's relentless passage. The apartment is quiet. Too quiet. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when my phone rang constantly. Children calling for advice, grandchildren sharing their latest achievements, friends planning lunch dates and shopping trips. My calendar was filled with birthdays to remember, school plays to attend, family dinners to host in my old house on Maple Street. That house, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a wraparound porch where Richard and I used to sit every evening, watching the neighborhood children ride their bikes and play until their parents called them home for dinner. We bought it in 1967, fresh-faced newlyweds who thought the mortgage payments would be our biggest challenge. We had no idea how wrong we were. The house held everything: our wedding photos lining the staircase, height marks on the kitchen doorframe tracking our children's growth, the living room where we hosted Christmas mornings and birthday parties. Every corner whispered memories of a life fully lived, a family that once felt unbreakable. But that morning, sitting in my tiny apartment kitchen, I stared at my phone screen, displaying a message that had arrived at 11:47 p.m. the night before, from my son Daniel. "Mom, need help with mortgage again. Behind 3 months. Can you transfer $3,500? Emergency. Thanks. No. How are you? No. I hope you're feeling well. Just a request." Another request in an endless chain of requests that had defined our relationship for the past decade. I scrolled up through our message history, my heart sinking with each exchange. Every conversation started the same way. Daniel needed something: money for his daughter's dental work, help with his car payment, assistance with his credit card debt. Each time he promised it was the last time. Each time I believed him because I wanted to. Because hope, even misguided hope, felt better than the alternative. My finger hovered over his contact information. Daniel Whitmore, my firstborn, the baby I held through countless sleepless nights. The toddler who used to crawl into bed with Richard and me during thunderstorms. The young man who promised he'd always take care of me when I got older. When did those promises become expectations? When did my love become a transaction? I remember the exact moment I realized something had changed. It was my 77th birthday, 2 years ago. I had spent the entire day waiting for the phone to ring, checking my mailbox for cards, hoping someone would remember. By evening, I had given up and made myself a small dinner, canned soup and crackers, when Daniel finally called. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said. But I could hear the television in the background, his attention divided. "Sorry I'm calling so late. Been crazy busy." "That's okay, sweetheart," I replied, grateful just to hear his voice. "How are the kids?" "Good, good. Listen, Mom, while I have you on the phone," and there it was. The real reason for the call. He needed money for his son's baseball equipment. $500. I sent it the next morning, just like I always did. But something felt different that day. As I walked to the bank, my steps felt heavier. The teller, a young woman named Sarah who always greeted me warmly, asked if everything was okay. "Just tired," I told her. But that wasn't entirely true. I wasn't just tired. I was empty, drained, like a well that had been drawn from too many times without ever being refilled. The pattern continued for months. Daniel would call with another crisis, another urgent need. His wife had lost her job. The roof needed repairs. The kids needed school supplies. each request accompanied by the same promise that this was temporary, that things would turn around soon. I never said no. How could I? This was my son, my flesh and blood, the child I had sacrificed everything for, just like my mother had sacrificed for me, and her mother before her. It was what mothers did. We gave until there was nothing left to give, and then we found more to give anyway. But that morning, staring at his latest message, something inside me cracked. Not broke, that would come later, but cracked, like ice beginning to splinter under too much weight. I set my phone aside and walked to my bedroom, where I kept a small wooden box on my dresser. Inside were photographs, family pictures from happier times. There was Daniel at his college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. Another of him holding his first child, my granddaughter Emma, tears of joy streaming down his face as he whispered, "Thank you for everything, Mom. I couldn't have done this without you." When had those grateful tears dried up? When had thank you become I need? I closed the box and returned to the kitchen, where my coffee had grown cold and my phone continued to display Daniel's message, waiting for my response. $3,500. More than my monthly Social Security check. Money I didn't really have, but would find anyway, because that's what I always did. That's what I had always done. But as I sat there in the morning light, surrounded by the silence of my small apartment, I found myself asking a question I had never dared ask before. What if I didn't? I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out a shoebox I hadn't opened in months. Inside were bank statements, receipts, and handwritten notes. A paper trail of 20 years of giving, 20 years of saying yes when I should have learned to say no. The first receipt was dated March 15th, 2004, Daniel's wedding. I had liquidated my retirement savings to help pay for the reception he and his fiancée Jessica wanted. $12,000 for a single day. I remember Richard's face when I told him what I'd done. He didn't say anything, just squeezed my hand and nodded. He understood. We both believed that investing in our children's happiness was the right thing to do. But Richard died 3 years later. And suddenly, I was alone with a legacy of choices that seemed less wise in retrospect. Another receipt. Daniel's first house down payment. $45,000. I had sold my mother's diamond engagement ring, the one she'd worn for 63 years of marriage, the one she'd slipped off her finger just before she passed and pressed into my palm, whispering, "This is your inheritance, Margaret. Your security." I convinced myself Daniel needed it more than I did. Young families needed stability, I reasoned. I could always downsize later. The memories flooded back as I sifted through the papers. Danny's job loss in 2010. I covered his mortgage for 8 months while he looked for the right opportunity. His wife's medical bills when Emma was born with complications. I emptied my savings account and took out a loan against my house. The business venture that failed spectacularly. Another $20,000 that evaporated like morning mist. Each time, Daniel promised to pay me back. Each time, I told him not to worry about it. Family doesn't keep score, I'd say, echoing something my own mother used to tell me. But looking at these papers spread across my bed, I realized that while I wasn't keeping score, I was certainly paying the price. My daughter Sarah was no different. If anything, she was more subtle in her extractions. Where Daniel asked directly, Sarah employed guilt and manipulation with surgical precision. Her children, my other grandchildren, needed private school tuition. Her husband's construction business required an emergency loan. Their vacation home needed repairs. "Mom, you know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," she'd say, her voice taking on that special tone reserved for financial conversations. "We're not like some families who take advantage. This is different. This is an investment in the grandchildren's future." The grandchildren's future. How many times had I heard that phrase? How many times had I nodded and reached for my checkbook, convincing myself that every dollar I gave was a gift to the next generation? But when was the last time those grandchildren had called me just to talk? When was the last time they'd visited without being prompted by their parents? Emma was 16 now, old enough to drive, old enough to have her own phone, old enough to remember her grandmother's birthday without being reminded. Yet my phone remained silent on every milestone, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday when a simple "How are you, Grandma?" would have meant more than any amount of money. I found a letter I'd written to myself after Richard's funeral, a promise to be more careful with my finances, to think about my own future, to stop enabling my children's dependency. I never sent it, never acted on it. Instead, I filed it away with all the other good intentions that had paved my road to financial ruin. The phone rang, startling me from my reverie. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice bright with artificial cheer. "How are you doing?" For just a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe she was calling to check on me, to have a real conversation, to bridge the growing distance between us. "I'm well, sweetheart. How are the kids?" "Oh, they're great. Growing so fast." Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. The familiar shift in tone. Here it comes. Tyler got accepted into that robotics camp we talked about. It's such an amazing opportunity, but the cost is— "How much?" I interrupted, suddenly tired of the elaborate preambles. $3,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's his passion, Mom. And you know how competitive college admissions are these days. This could really set him apart. $3,000 for a summer camp, added to Daniel's $3,500, almost $7,000 in a single week. More than I lived on in 3 months. "Sarah, I need to think about it." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, hurt creeping into her voice. "Think about it? Mom, this is Tyler we're talking about. Your grandson. I thought you'd want to help him succeed." The guilt arrow, aimed with practiced precision. I felt it hit its mark, that familiar ache in my chest that came whenever I disappointed my children. But for the first time, I also felt something else, a tiny spark of rebellion. "I said I need to think about it, Sarah." "Well, okay, but the deadline is next week. They need a deposit to hold his spot." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of decades of financial sacrifice. I calculated quickly. Between what my children had asked for over the years, I could have funded my own comfortable retirement, could have traveled with Richard before his health declined, could have maintained the house that now belonged to strangers. I walked to my bathroom mirror and stared at the woman looking back at me. 79 years old, with silver hair that needed coloring and wrinkles that spoke of decades of worry. When had I started looking so tired? When had the light gone out of my eyes? My mother's words echoed in my memory. A woman's worth isn't measured by what she keeps, but by what she gives. I had lived by that philosophy my entire life, measuring my value as a mother, a wife, a human being by how much I could sacrifice for others. But what happens when you give so much that there's nothing left? What happens when your worth is measured only by your utility, your willingness to open your wallet and empty your savings? I thought about Richard, about the conversations we'd had in those quiet moments before he fell asleep, how he'd worry about me being alone, about whether I'd be okay financially. "You're too generous, Margaret," he'd say. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself first." I had promised. But promises to the dead, I'd learned, are easier to break than promises to the living. That evening, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I called my bank and asked them to review my accounts with me. Mary, the financial advisor who'd helped me navigate Richard's estate, agreed to meet with me the next morning. "I want to understand exactly where I stand financially," I told her over the phone, "and I want to explore my options for protecting what's left." For the first time in years, I was going to take an honest look at the cost of my generosity. For the first time in years, I was going to ask not what I could give, but what I could afford to keep. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself wondering, was I used? The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, impossible to breathe around. 20 years of financial records didn't lie. Phone logs didn't lie. The pattern of contact only when money was needed, the promises never kept, the gratitude that faded as quickly as the bank transfers cleared. Was I used? I was beginning to think the answer was yes. The meeting with Mary at the bank was scheduled for 10 a.m., but I arrived 30 minutes early. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching people hurry in and out of the building. Young couples discussing mortgage applications, elderly men depositing Social Security checks, business people conducting transactions with the efficiency of those who had never known financial uncertainty. I wondered what they would think if they knew my story. Would they see me as foolish, naive, or would they recognize something familiar in my choices? A pattern they'd witnessed in their own families. Mary's office was small but comfortable, with family photos on her desk and certificates on the wall that spoke of professional competence. She greeted me with the warm smile of someone who genuinely cared about her clients' financial well-being, not just their account balances. "Margaret, it's good to see you. How have you been since our last meeting?" I settled into the chair across from her desk, my purse clutched tightly in my lap. That's what I'm here to find out, I suppose. We spent the next hour reviewing my accounts, and with each number Mary read aloud, I felt pieces of my financial security crumble away. My savings account, once robust enough to ensure a comfortable retirement, had dwindled to less than $8,000. My checking account barely covered monthly expenses. The home equity line of credit I'd opened to help Daniel with his various crises was nearly maxed out. "Margaret," Mary said gently, "at your current rate of expenditure, and considering your fixed income, you have maybe 18 months before you'll face serious financial difficulties." 18 months. Less than 2 years before I'd become the person my children worried about instead of the person they turned to for help. The irony wasn't lost on me. "What about the house?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "You still have equity, but not as much as you might think. Between the original mortgage balance and the home equity line, your net worth in the property is about $40,000. That's something, but it's not retirement security. $40,000. The same amount I'd given Daniel for his first house down payment. The same amount I'd lent Sarah for her husband's failed business venture. Money I'd never asked to be repaid because family doesn't keep score." I drove home in a daze, Mary's words echoing in my head. 18 months. I had 18 months before I'd need help myself, before I'd become the burden I'd spent my entire life trying not to be. That afternoon, my grandson Tyler called. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought he might be calling to thank me for considering the robotics camp funding, or maybe just to chat with his grandmother. "Hi, Grandma. Mom said you're thinking about the camp thing." "Yes, Tyler, I'm considering it." "Cool. I mean, it would really help me get into MIT or Stanford. All the top engineering programs look for this kind of stuff. MIT or Stanford." At 17, he was already planning a future that cost more than I'd ever earned. I found myself wondering if he had any idea what his grandmother did to make ends meet. If he knew I clipped coupons and shopped clearance sales to stretch my Social Security check. "Tyler, when was the last time we spent time together? Just you and me?" Silence on the other end. I don't know. I've been really busy with school and soccer and stuff." "Of course. You're a busy young man." "Yeah. So, about the camp?" "About the camp. Not about me, not about my health, not about whether I was lonely or struggling or needed anything myself. Just about the camp. I'll let your mother know by Friday," I said. After I hung up, I sat in my living room, staring at the framed photos scattered across my coffee table. There was one from Tyler's 13th birthday party, a lavish affair at a country club that I'd helped fund. In the photo, Tyler was surrounded by friends, his face bright with joy. I was in the background, barely visible, clearing plates from tables. That image seemed to summarize my role in my family's life perfectly. Always in the background, always useful, never quite the focus of anyone's attention. My 78th birthday had been 6 months ago. I'd spent the day alone, waiting for phone calls that came late, or not at all. Daniel had sent a text message at 11 p.m. "Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry, crazy day." Sarah had called 3 days later, apologetic and distracted, explaining that her week had been hectic. But 2 weeks after my birthday, when Sarah's washing machine broke down, I'd received 4 phone calls in a single day. The urgency in her voice when she needed something was never present when she was simply checking on my well-being. The pattern extended to holidays, too. Last Christmas, I'd spent alone for the first time since Richard's death. Daniel's family had gone to Jessica's parents' house. Sarah's family had taken a ski vacation. Both had promised to make it up to me, to plan something special for New Year's. New Year's came and went. The special celebration never materialized. But when January brought unexpected car repairs for Daniel and emergency dental work for Sarah's youngest, suddenly I was essential again. Suddenly, my phone rang with regularity and warmth. I began to notice other patterns, too. The way conversations shifted when I brought up my own concerns. Last month, I'd mentioned to Sarah that I'd been feeling dizzy and was worried about my blood pressure medication. "That's concerning, Mom. You should definitely call Dr. Henderson," she'd said. Then immediately transitioned to discussing her daughter's need for a new laptop for school. When I'd tried to continue talking about my health concerns, her responses became shorter, more distracted. But when the conversation turned to the laptop's cost, her attention sharpened considerably. I started paying attention to these micro moments of dismissal. The way Daniel would cut me off mid-sentence when I began talking about my loneliness, then launch into detailed explanations of his own stress. The way Sarah would respond to my concerns with quick, superficial reassurances before steering the conversation back to her family's needs. Was this normal? Was this how adult children were supposed to treat their aging parents? I thought about my own relationship with my mother before she passed. Had I been equally dismissive of her needs while focusing on my own family's demands? The realization hit me like a physical blow. Probably, yes. The cycle had repeated across generations, and I had participated in it without recognizing its cruelty. But awareness of my own past failings didn't diminish the pain of experiencing that same dismissal from my children. 3 days before I was supposed to give Sarah an answer about Tyler's camp, I was putting away laundry when I came across a box of old greeting cards. Birthday cards, Mother's Day cards, Christmas cards from years past. I sat on my bed and read through them, remembering when my children's expressions of love had felt genuine and spontaneous. "Mom, you're the best. Thank you for everything," Daniel had written in a Father's Day card he'd given me after Richard died, acknowledging that I'd taken on both parental roles. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom. You're our rock," Sarah had written just 2 years ago. But when had I stopped being their rock and started being their bank? When had their gratitude transformed into expectation? That evening, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I called Daniel. "Hi, Mom. Did you transfer that money yet? I'm getting notices from the mortgage company." "Daniel, I need to talk to you about something important." "Sure, but can it wait? I'm dealing with this mortgage thing and—" "No, it can't wait." Something in my tone must have gotten his attention because he went quiet. "I've been thinking about our relationship lately, about what I mean to you beyond being someone who can solve your financial problems." "Mom, where is this coming from? You're being dramatic again." Dramatic. There was that word again, the word that dismissed my feelings, invalidated my concerns, reduced my legitimate hurt to emotional instability. "When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing?" We talk all the time. We communicate when you need money. That's different from talking." "Mom, I don't know what you want me to say. We're busy. Everyone's busy. That's just how life is." Just how life is. As if my increasing invisibility was as natural and inevitable as the weather. "I see," I said quietly. "So, about the mortgage money." I hung up. For the first time in 20 years, I hung up on my son. My hands were shaking, but not from age or arthritis. They were shaking from the adrenaline of finally saying no, even if I hadn't said the word aloud. The phone rang again, immediately. Daniel's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again. I turned off the phone and sat in the silence of my apartment, feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified. What had I just done? What would happen now? But beneath the fear was something else. A tiny seed of self-respect that I'd thought was buried forever. For the first time in decades, I'd chosen myself over someone else's demands. It felt foreign and familiar all at once, like remembering how to use a muscle that had been neglected for too long. I turned my phone back on the next morning to find 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the notifications. Daniel, Sarah, even Jessica had called. The panic in their voices was immediate and unmistakable. The first voicemail was from Daniel, recorded just minutes after I'd hung up. "Mom, I don't know what just happened. Call me back. This mortgage thing is serious." The second, "Mom, your phone is going straight to voicemail. I'm getting worried. Are you okay?" By the fifth message, concern had transformed into something else entirely. Mom, I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't funny. I have a family to think about. Call me back. Sarah's messages followed a similar progression, but with her characteristic manipulation woven throughout. Mom, Daniel called me crying. He says you hung up on him? That doesn't sound like you. Are you feeling all right? Maybe we should make you a doctor's appointment. The suggestion that my newfound backbone was a sign of illness rather than clarity struck me as both insulting and revealing. In their minds, the only explanation for my resistance was mental deterioration. Jessica's single message was perhaps the most telling. Margaret, I know family relationships can be complicated, but Daniel is really stressed about the house. We have 2 kids to think about. I hope you understand what's at stake here. What's at stake? As if my financial ruin was less important than their temporary inconvenience. I made coffee and sat with my phone, listening to each message twice. The evolution from concern to frustration to barely concealed anger painted a clear picture of how my family viewed me. I was a resource that had malfunctioned, a machine that needed to be fixed and put back into service. At 9 a.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah standing on my doorstep, her face creased with what looked like genuine worry. Behind her stood Daniel, his expression harder to read. I opened the door slowly, still in my bathrobe and slippers. Mom! Sarah rushed forward as if to embrace me, then stopped short, her eyes scanning my face for signs of illness or confusion. We were so worried. When you didn't answer your phone. I'm fine, Sarah. I just needed some quiet time to think. Daniel stepped forward, his impatience barely contained. Mom, what the hell was that yesterday? Hanging up on me? Daniel, please watch your language. Watch my language? Mom, I'm about to lose my house and you're worried about my language? The 3 of us stood in my small entryway, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah kept glancing between Daniel and me, clearly trying to assess the situation and determine the best strategy for damage control. Can we sit down and talk about this? Sarah suggested, her voice taking on the artificially calm tone she used when managing difficult situations. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. We moved to my living room, Daniel pacing near the window while Sarah and I sat on opposite ends of my small couch. The coffee table between us suddenly felt like a battlefield, scattered with the same family photos that had once brought me comfort, but now seemed to mock the distance that had grown between us. Mom, Sarah began, Daniel told me about your conversation yesterday, about how you questioned whether we care about you. That hurt me, because you know how much we love you. Do I? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Daniel spun around from the window. What kind of question is that? Of course we love you. You're our mother. When was the last time either of you visited me without needing something? Sarah's face flushed slightly. Mom, we're busy. We have jobs, kids, responsibilities. That doesn't mean we don't care. Too busy to call on my birthday? Too busy to check on me when I mentioned being dizzy? But never too busy to ask for money? That's not fair, Daniel said, his voice rising. We appreciate everything you do for us. We've never taken you for granted. Then why does every conversation start with what you need from me? Because, Daniel paused, struggling for words. Because you always say yes. Because you want to help. Because that's what families do. What families do, I repeated slowly. What do you do for me, Daniel? What does family mean from your side? He stared at me as if I'd asked him to solve advanced calculus. The question seemed to genuinely perplex him. Sarah jumped in, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. Mom, you're being unfair. We show our love in different ways. Daniel calls you when he needs advice about money problems, and I include you in the kids' activities when you need funding for them. Mom, stop. Sarah's mask was beginning to slip. You're twisting everything. You're making us sound like horrible people when all we've ever done is treat you like family. Like an ATM. The words hung in the air like a slap. Sarah's mouth fell open and Daniel's face went red. That's not true, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Sarah, when Tyler called about the robotics camp, did he ask how I was doing? Did he want to spend time with me? Or did he only want to know about funding? He's a teenager, Mom. They're all self-centered. And what's your excuse? What's Daniel's excuse? Daniel moved closer, his frustration boiling over. My excuse? My excuse is that I'm drowning, Mom. My excuse is that I trusted you when you said family comes first. My excuse is that I believed you when you said you wanted to help. I did want to help. I wanted to help so much that I've spent my retirement savings. I've mortgaged my future. I've given you everything I had to give, and we're grateful. Are you? When was the last time you said thank you without immediately asking for something else? The silence stretched between us, filled with 20 years of unspoken resentment and unacknowledged truth. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice trembling with barely controlled anger. So what are you saying, Mom? That you're cutting us off? That you don't care about your grandchildren's futures? The manipulation was so blatant, so practiced, that I almost laughed. Instead, I felt a cold clarity settle over me. I'm saying that I matter too, that my financial security matters, that my future matters. Of course you matter, Daniel said, but it sounded hollow. Then prove it. Show me that I matter for something other than what I can give you. How? Sarah demanded. What do you want from us? The question revealed everything. They genuinely didn't understand what I was asking for because they'd never considered that I might need something from them beyond the role of provider. I want you to call me because you miss me, not because you need me. I want you to visit because you enjoy my company, not because you have a favor to ask. I want you to include me in your lives as a person, not a resource. We do, Daniel started. No, you don't. And the fact that you can't see the difference is part of the problem. Sarah stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. Fine, Mom. You want to be selfish? You want to abandon your family when we need you most? That's your choice. But don't expect us to pretend everything is okay when you're literally letting Daniel lose his house. I'm not letting Daniel lose his house. Daniel's financial mismanagement is letting Daniel lose his house. That's cruel, Mom. That's just cruel. Is it crueler than expecting your elderly mother to sacrifice her retirement security for your poor planning? The question hit like a physical blow. Sarah's face went white, and Daniel sank into a chair as if his legs had given out. I need both of you to leave, I said quietly. Mom, Sarah started. Leave, please. They gathered their things in stunned silence. At the door, Daniel turned back one last time. Mom, I don't understand what's happening to you. This isn't who you are. Maybe it's who I should have been all along. After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the wreckage of relationships I'd thought were built on love, but were apparently constructed on obligation and expectation. The silence felt different now, not empty, but clear, like the air after a storm has passed. My phone began ringing again within the hour. First Jessica, her voice tight with controlled panic. Margaret, I don't know what Daniel did to upset you, but please don't punish the children for their father's mistakes. Then Tyler, clearly coached by his parents. Grandma, Mom said you're mad at us. I don't really understand why, but if I did something wrong, I'm sorry. The manipulation was exhausting in its transparency. They were using my grandchildren as emotional weapons, counting on my love for them to override my self-preservation. But for the first time in decades, I could see the strings being pulled. I could see the game being played, and I was tired of being the only one who didn't know the rules. That evening, I made 2 phone calls. First, to Mary at the bank. I'd like to set up an appointment to discuss protecting my remaining assets. Second, to a lawyer whose advertisement I'd seen in the local paper. I need help setting boundaries with my family regarding my finances. For the first time in 20 years, I was building walls instead of tearing them down. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing self-preservation over self-sacrifice. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and old books, with mahogany furniture that spoke of tradition and permanence. Robert Chen had been practicing family law in Chicago for 30 years, and his calm demeanor suggested he'd seen every variation of family financial drama that existed. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, reviewing the notes I'd provided before our meeting, what you're describing is unfortunately quite common. Adult children who've become financially dependent on elderly parents often struggle to accept boundaries. I feel like I'm being selfish, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. They're my children. Isn't it my job to help them? Help? Yes. Enable financial irresponsibility at the expense of your own security? No. He leaned forward slightly. Margaret, may I ask you a direct question? I nodded. If your roles were reversed, if you were in financial trouble and needed help, do you believe your children would sacrifice their retirement security to save you? The question hit me like ice water. I opened my mouth to say yes, of course they would. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, I knew the answer. I'd seen how they reacted to my minor health concerns, how quickly they changed the subject when I mentioned feeling lonely or worried about my finances. I don't know, I whispered. That uncertainty tells you everything you need to know about whether you're being reasonable in protecting what's left of your assets. He walked me through my options. I could establish a trust that would prevent me from making large withdrawals without cooling off periods. I could change my will to reflect my current feelings about how my estate should be distributed. I could even pursue legal action to recover some of the money I'd given over the years, though he warned that would be difficult and emotionally costly. The most important thing, he said, is that you make these decisions while you're still mentally competent and not under duress. If you wait until you're desperate or your family is pressuring you more intensely, your options become limited. I left his office with homework, a list of all the financial help I'd provided over the past decade, documentation of my current assets, and a hard deadline to make decisions about protecting my future. The drive home took me past Daniel's neighborhood. Almost without thinking, I turned down his street. His house sat on a corner lot, a beautiful colonial with a 3-car garage and perfectly manicured landscaping. The mortgage I'd been helping to pay for years had funded this lifestyle that was so far beyond my own means. I parked across the street and stared at the house I'd helped buy but had rarely been invited to enjoy. When was the last time I'd been welcome there for a family dinner? When had I last been included in one of their backyard barbecues or holiday celebrations? As I sat there, Jessica emerged from the front door, herding their 2 children toward her Lexus SUV. Emma, now 16, walked with the confident stride of a teenager who'd never known financial insecurity. Jake, 13, was absorbed in some handheld gaming device that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. They were beautiful children, and I loved them desperately. But watching them now, I realized they had no idea who I really was beyond the woman who sent birthday checks and funded their various activities. Would they even notice if I disappeared from their lives tomorrow? Or would they only notice when the money stopped coming? Jessica spotted my car and walked over, her expression cautious but determined. "Margaret," she said through my partially open window, "I'm glad I caught you. We need to talk." "Do we?" Daniel is beside himself. He's been calling mortgage companies all morning, trying to work out payment plans. He's terrified we're going to lose the house. I looked past her to the house in question, the house with the gourmet kitchen I'd helped finance, the master suite addition I'd funded, the swimming pool I'd made possible. "Jessica, when Daniel asked me to help with the down payment 8 years ago, he promised it was a one-time thing. He said he just needed help getting started, that he'd take care of everything after that. Things changed. The economy, his job situation, things always change. That's why responsible adults plan for contingencies instead of counting on their elderly parents to subsidize their lifestyle." Jessica's face flushed. "That's not fair. We never asked you to subsidize anything. We asked for help during difficult times." 8 years of difficult times? Jessica, I've been covering part of your mortgage for longer than some marriages last. We're grateful. Are you? When Daniel called yesterday, did he thank me for the years of help I've already given? Did he acknowledge that I've sacrificed my own financial security for his? Or did he just demand to know why I hadn't sent more money? Jessica's silence was answer enough. "I'm not trying to be cruel," I continued, "but I'm 79 years old. I have maybe 10 good years left, and I'd like to spend them without worrying about whether I can afford my medication or my rent. So you're just abandoning us? Abandoning your grandchildren?" The guilt arrow, aimed with practiced precision. But this time, it bounced off armor I was still learning to wear. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm choosing to stop enabling financial irresponsibility at the expense of my own survival." Jessica's composure cracked. "Fine. But don't expect us to pretend everything is normal when you're being selfish. Selfish. The word that had controlled me for decades. The accusation that had made me doubt every decision to prioritize my own needs. But hearing it now, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Maybe it's time I learned to be a little selfish, I said. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked myself a real dinner. Not the simple, economical meals I'd grown accustomed to while saving money to send to my children, but an actual celebration of food. I bought a small steak, fresh asparagus, and a bottle of wine that cost more than my usual weekly grocery budget. As I prepared the meal, I found myself thinking about all the dinners I'd skipped, all the small luxuries I'd foregone to ensure I had money available when my children called. When was the last time I'd treated myself to something purely because I wanted it? The steak was perfect, the asparagus crisp, the wine smooth and rich. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, marveling at how long it had been since I'd paid attention to the pleasure of a well-prepared meal. After dinner, I did something else I hadn't done in months. I called my old friend Helen, a woman I'd grown distant from as my life became increasingly consumed by my children's crises. "Margaret!" Her voice was warm with genuine pleasure. "It's been too long. How are you, dear?" The simple question, asked without any underlying agenda, nearly brought me to tears. "I'm figuring that out, actually." We talked for 2 hours. About books, about the changes in our neighborhood, about her recent trip to visit her sister in California. She asked about my health, my living situation, my happiness. She didn't ask about my children until near the end of the conversation, and when she did, it was with concern for how I was handling their demands, not curiosity about what they needed. "You know, Margaret," she said as our conversation wound down, "I've watched you sacrifice yourself for those children for years. I've always wondered when you'd realize that love doesn't require bankruptcy. I'm realizing it now. Good. It's not too late to reclaim your life." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Contentment. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. The absence of crisis calls and urgent demands felt like a gift rather than loneliness. I pulled out a notebook and began to write. Not financial calculations or budget plans, but dreams. Things I'd wanted to do but had postponed indefinitely while managing other people's emergencies. I wanted to take a photography class. I'd always loved capturing moments, but I'd never had the time or money to pursue it seriously. I wanted to travel, even if just locally. There were museums in Chicago I'd never visited, neighborhoods I'd never explored, restaurants I'd never tried. I wanted to volunteer somewhere that mattered, somewhere my time and energy would be appreciated rather than expected. I wanted to read all the books that had been gathering dust on my shelf while I worried about other people's problems. Most importantly, I wanted to wake up each morning wondering what I might discover about myself that day, instead of wondering which child would call with a crisis that would drain my emotional and financial resources. For the first time in years, I went to bed excited about tomorrow. The next morning brought a call from Tyler, not the coached apology from the day before, but something that sounded more genuine. "Grandma, I've been thinking about what happened with Dad and Mom Sarah. I don't really understand all of it, but are you okay?" The question was simple, but it was the first time in months that anyone in my family had asked about my well-being without an underlying agenda. "I'm working on it, sweetheart." "Good. I mean, I know I don't call enough or visit enough. I guess I never really thought about you being lonely or anything. I just thought of you as, Grandma. Always there, always fine, always fine." How many people in my life saw me that way? Always fine, always available, always ready to solve problems and provide solutions without having any needs of my own? "Tyler, would you like to have lunch with me sometime? Just the two of us?" "Yeah, I'd like that." "No camp fundraising or anything, just hanging out?" "Just hanging out." For the first time in weeks, I smiled without forcing it. Maybe not everything was lost. Maybe some relationships could be salvaged once the financial desperation was removed from the equation. But even if they couldn't, I was beginning to realize that I would be okay. For the first time in decades, I was choosing myself, and it felt like coming home. 3 weeks after my conversation with Tyler, the inevitable happened. Daniel's mortgage company began foreclosure proceedings. And suddenly, I was no longer just a disappointing mother. I was the villain in their family crisis. The call came from Sarah at 6:30 in the morning, her voice shrill with panic and accusation. "Mom, they're taking Daniel's house. The bank is taking their house. Are you happy now?" I sat up in bed, instantly awake. "Sarah, I'm sorry to hear—" "Sorry? You're sorry? You could stop this with one phone call to your bank. You could save your son's family and you're sorry." "Sarah, Daniel had months to work out a payment plan because he was counting on you. Because for 8 years you've been part of their financial planning. You can't just abandon them now." The word abandon hit like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain calm. I didn't abandon anyone. I stopped enabling financial irresponsibility. Those are your grandchildren who are going to be homeless, Mom. Emma and Jake. Do they deserve this because of your new selfish phase? And there it was. The nuclear option, my grandchildren, weaponized against me with surgical precision. Where will they go, Sarah? What do you mean? If Daniel loses the house, where will Emma and Jake live? Silence on the other end of the line. "They'll figure something out," she said finally. "They'll figure something out. Not, they can stay with us. Not, we'll help them. They'll figure something out." "Mom, that's not the point." "It's exactly the point. You're using my love for those children to manipulate me, but you're not offering any real solutions yourself. I can't afford to house 5 extra people, but I can afford to bankrupt myself to prevent you from having to try." The hypocrisy hung in the air between us like smoke. "This is what family does, Mom. This is what love looks like." "No, Sarah. This is what exploitation looks like. Love would be Daniel taking responsibility for his own family. Love would be you offering actual help instead of demanding that I sacrifice my future. Love would be any of you caring about my well-being for its own sake. We do care. Prove it. Tell me one conversation we've had in the past year that wasn't about money." Silence. "Tell me one time you've asked about my health, my loneliness, my fears about getting older." More silence. "Tell me one way you've shown care for me that didn't involve what I could provide for you." "Mom, this isn't fair. What's not fair is expecting your elderly mother to choose between her children's comfort and her own survival." I hung up and immediately turned off my phone. Within 2 hours, my doorbell was ringing. Through the peephole, I saw not just Daniel and Sarah, but Jessica and both grandchildren. The entire family had assembled for what was clearly intended to be the final assault on my defenses. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "We need to talk," Daniel said, his face haggard with stress and sleepless nights. "All of us," Sarah added, "as a family." Emma stepped forward, her 16-year-old face streaked with tears. "Grandma, please don't let them take our house. I don't want to leave my room, my school, my friends." The sight of my granddaughter's tears nearly shattered my resolve. This was exactly what they'd counted on, that my love for these children would override my self-preservation instincts. "Come in," I said quietly. They arranged themselves in my small living room like a tribunal. Daniel and Jessica on the couch, Sarah in the armchair, the children on the floor. All eyes focused on me with varying degrees of desperation, anger, and expectation. "Grandma," Jake said, his 13-year-old voice cracking with emotion, "Dad says you're mad at us. What did we do wrong?" The question broke my heart because it revealed the fundamental manipulation at work. The children had been told they were somehow responsible for this crisis, that my financial boundaries were punishment for their behavior. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. This isn't about you or Emma." "Then why won't you help us?" Emma asked. "We've always been good to you, always been good to me." When was the last time either of them had called just to chat? When had they last visited without being driven by their parents? When had they ever shown interest in my life beyond what I could provide for theirs? But they were children, and I couldn't blame them for patterns their parents had established. "Emma, Jake, I love you both more than you'll ever know, but what your parents are asking me to do would leave me unable to take care of myself." But we need," Emma started. "I need too," I interrupted gently. "I need to have enough money for my medication, my rent, my food. I need to know that I won't become homeless myself." Daniel leaned forward, his face flushed with anger. That's not going to happen, Mom. You're being dramatic. Dramatic. Even now, even facing the loss of his house, he couldn't acknowledge the legitimacy of my concerns. Daniel, I've given you over $100,000 in the past 8 years. Jessica gasped. She clearly hadn't known the full extent of their dependence on me. If I had that money now, I could afford assisted living when I need it. I could pay for home health care. I could ensure that I don't become a burden to anyone. You're not a burden, Sarah started. Aren't I? When I mentioned being dizzy last month, you told me to call my doctor and change the subject. When I said I was lonely, you suggested I get a hobby. But when you need money, suddenly I'm essential. That's not fair, Jessica said. We've been dealing with our own stress. And I've been dealing with mine, alone, while funding yours. I walked to my bedroom and returned with a folder I'd prepared after meeting with the lawyer. Inside were copies of every check I'd written, every transfer I'd made, every financial sacrifice I'd made for my family over the past decade. This is what I've given you, I said, placing the folder on the coffee table. This is my retirement fund. This is my security. This is the difference between aging with dignity and aging in poverty. Daniel picked up the folder and began flipping through the pages. With each document, his face grew paler. I never added it all up. I did. $137,000. Plus the down payment on this house, which was another $45,000. Plus countless smaller amounts that I didn't document. We're grateful, Sarah began. Stop saying you're grateful. Grateful people don't demand more. Grateful people don't guilt and manipulate and threaten. Grateful people say thank you and mean it. I walked to my desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a letter I'd written but hadn't planned to read unless this moment came. I want to read you something, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. For 20 years, I have defined my worth by what I could give you. I measured my love by how much I was willing to sacrifice. I believed that being a good mother meant saying yes to every request, funding every crisis, enabling every poor decision. I was wrong. A good mother teaches her children to be responsible adults. A good mother models self-respect and healthy boundaries. A good mother doesn't bankrupt herself to subsidize her adult children's lifestyle choices. I failed you by always saying yes. I failed you by never letting you experience the natural consequences of your decisions. I failed you by teaching you that love could be purchased with money and that family obligations only flowed in one direction. But I won't fail you anymore. Starting today, I will no longer provide financial assistance to any of you. I will not pay mortgages, fund vacations disguised as emergencies, or cover the costs of lifestyle choices you cannot afford. This is not punishment. This is love, real love, the kind that wants you to grow into capable, independent adults who don't rely on exploiting their elderly parents. The silence in the room was deafening. Emma was crying openly now, and Jake looked confused and frightened. Jessica stared at the financial documents spread on the coffee table, as if seeing her family's situation clearly for the first time. Sarah's face was white with shock, and what might have been the beginning of understanding. Daniel stood up abruptly, his face contorted with rage. Fine, he spat. You want to abandon your family? You want to let your grandchildren become homeless? That's your choice. But don't expect us to forgive you. Don't expect us to be there for you when you're old and sick and need us. The threat hung in the air like poison. The implication was clear. If I didn't fund their lifestyle, they would abandon me when I became truly vulnerable. Daniel, I said quietly, when have you ever been there for me when I needed you? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. When I had pneumonia last winter, who took care of me? When I fell and sprained my ankle, who helped me? When I mentioned being depressed after the anniversary of your father's death, who offered comfort? Each question hit like a hammer blow, and Daniel's face crumpled as he realized he had no answers. You're threatening to withhold care and support that I've never received anyway. You're threatening to stop providing love that has been conditional on my financial contributions all along. I walked to my front door and opened it. I need all of you to leave now. Mom? Sarah started. Leave, please. They filed out slowly, the children clinging to their parents, the adults shell-shocked by the confrontation. Emma turned back at the threshold. "I love you, Grandma," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart. That's why I'm doing this." After they left, I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs suddenly weak. The silence that followed felt different from any I'd experienced before. Not empty, but clean, like the air after a thunderstorm has cleared the atmosphere of everything heavy and oppressive. I had done it. I had chosen myself. For the first time in 20 years, I had put my own survival ahead of other people's demands. It felt terrifying and liberating and absolutely necessary. I was finally free. The first week after the confrontation was the hardest. I kept expecting my phone to ring, kept checking my messages, kept wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. The silence from my family felt both peaceful and terrifying. Had I traded love for self-respect? Had I chosen financial security over relationships with my grandchildren? But as the days passed, something unexpected began to happen. Without the constant undercurrent of anxiety about the next financial crisis, without the weight of always being on call for other people's emergencies, I began to remember who I was before I became solely defined by what I could provide. On the 8th day, I did something I hadn't done in over 15 years. I enrolled in a class purely for my own enjoyment. The community college offered a photography course for seniors, and when I saw the listing in their catalog, something stirred in me that I'd thought was dead. I'd loved photography as a young woman. Richard and I had spent weekends exploring Chicago with my old Pentax camera, capturing moments that seemed worth preserving. But somewhere along the way, between raising children and managing their endless needs, I'd stopped seeing the world as something beautiful to document and started seeing it only as a series of problems to solve. The classroom was filled with people my age, all of them carrying the same tentative excitement of rediscovering abandoned passions. Our instructor, Mrs. Chen, was a retired professional photographer who spoke about light and composition with the reverence of someone discussing sacred things. "Photography," she said during our first class, "is about seeing what others miss. It's about finding beauty in unexpected places and preserving moments that might otherwise be forgotten." As she spoke, I realized she could have been describing the process of reclaiming my own life. That afternoon, armed with a simple digital camera I'd purchased after class, I walked through my neighborhood with new eyes. I photographed the way afternoon light filtered through the leaves of the oak tree outside my apartment building. I captured the expression on an elderly man's face as he fed pigeons in the park. I documented the architectural details of buildings I'd walked past for years without really seeing. Each click of the shutter felt like a small act of rebellion against the years I'd spent focused solely on other people's needs. Each image was evidence that I existed as more than just a resource to be depleted. When I returned home, I had 37 photographs and something I hadn't felt in decades: anticipation for tomorrow's possibilities. The second major change came 3 weeks later, when I finally accepted Helen's repeated invitations to join her book club. I'd been declining for years, always citing some family obligation or financial concern that needed my attention. But without the constant drain of managing other people's crises, I suddenly had time for things I actually enjoyed. The book club met at the local library on Thursday evenings, and the 8 women who comprised our group were all in their 70s and 80s. They were retired teachers, nurses, secretaries, and homemakers who'd discovered that their lives didn't end when their primary roles as caregivers concluded. Our first book together was A Man Called Ove, a story about a grumpy widower who rediscovers meaning in his life through unexpected connections. As we discussed the themes of loss, resilience, and the importance of community, I found myself sharing more than I'd intended about my recent family situation. "You know, Margaret," said Dorothy, a former social worker who'd raised 4 children, "I went through something similar with my youngest son about 10 years ago. He kept coming to me with one financial emergency after another, and I kept bailing him out because I thought that's what good mothers do." "What changed?" I asked. I realized I wasn't helping him. I was crippling him. Every time I solved his problems, I took away his opportunity to grow stronger. Every time I said yes, I was actually saying no to his potential for independence. "Did he understand eventually?" Dorothy smiled sadly. "Not immediately. He was angry for about 2 years. But eventually, he learned to manage his own finances. And now our relationship is based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. He calls me because he wants to talk to me, not because he needs something from me. The story gave me hope that perhaps my situation with my own children might eventually improve, but more importantly, it helped me understand that even if it didn't, I'd still made the right choice. A month into my new life, I received an unexpected visitor. Tyler appeared at my door on a Saturday afternoon, not driven by his parents, but having taken the bus across town on his own initiative. "Grandma," he said, his voice uncertain. "Can we talk?" We sat in my small kitchen, sharing tea and store-bought cookies while he struggled to find words for what he wanted to say. "I've been thinking about what happened," he finally began. "About all this stuff with Dad and the house and everything. And I think maybe I understand better now." "What do you understand, sweetheart?" "That we were taking advantage of you. Maybe not on purpose, but when I really thought about it, I realized that every time I talked to you, it was because I wanted something. Money for camp or school stuff, or just because Mom told me to call and ask about some expensive thing." The honesty in his voice brought tears to my eyes. "And I realized I don't really know you. Like, I know you're my grandma and you love me and you've always helped us, but I don't know what your favorite book is, or what you wanted to be when you were my age, or what makes you happy. Would you like to know those things?" "Yeah, I really would." We spent the next 3 hours talking, really talking, for the first time in years. I told him about my photography class, showed him some of the pictures I'd taken around the neighborhood. He told me about his actual interests, not just the expensive activities his parents wanted to fund, but the books he enjoyed reading, the career he was considering that had nothing to do with robotics camps or prestigious universities. When it was time for him to leave, he hugged me with genuine warmth. "Grandma, I'm sorry we made you feel like you only mattered for what you could give us. That's not true, and it's not fair. Thank you for saying that, Tyler. Can I come visit again next weekend? Just to hang out?" "I'd love that." After he left, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The joy of being valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. The transformation in my daily life was remarkable. Without the constant anxiety about the next financial request, I slept better. Without the guilt of always disappointing someone, I ate with more appetite. Without the weight of everyone else's problems on my shoulders, I stood straighter. I started volunteering at the local animal shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but had never had time for. The dogs and cats didn't care about my bank balance or my ability to solve their problems. They just appreciated my presence, my gentle touch, my willingness to sit quietly with them. Mrs. Patterson, the shelter director, was a woman in her 60s who'd started the nonprofit after her own retirement. "Margaret," she said after I'd been volunteering for a month, "you have such a calming presence with the animals. Have you ever considered that you might have been giving your nurturing energy to the wrong recipients?" The observation was gentle but profound. I had been a caregiver my entire adult life, but I'd been caregiving for people who took my efforts for granted while neglecting those who might truly appreciate what I had to offer. 3 months after my family confrontation, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable in my previous life. I booked a trip to California to visit my cousin Ruth, whom I hadn't seen in over a decade. Ruth had invited me countless times over the years, but I'd always declined, citing the expense or some family obligation that required my attention. But with my financial boundaries firmly in place and my calendar no longer dominated by other people's crises, I finally had the freedom to prioritize my own desires. The flight to San Francisco was my first in 23 years. As the plane lifted off from O'Hare Airport, I felt a literal and metaphorical sense of rising above the circumstances that had kept me grounded for so long. Ruth met me at the airport with tears in her eyes and accusations in her voice. "Margaret Whitmore, it's about damn time you put yourself first. I've been watching you sacrifice yourself for those ungrateful children for years, and I'm proud of you for finally saying enough." We spent a week exploring Northern California, wine country, redwood forests, coastal drives that took my breath away. I photographed everything, filling memory cards with images that captured not just the scenery, but my own sense of rediscovered wonder. On our last evening together, as we sat on Ruth's deck watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, She asked me a question that crystallized everything I'd been feeling. "Margaret, what do you want the rest of your life to look like?" For the first time in decades, I had an answer that didn't revolve around other people's needs. I want to wake up excited about the day ahead. I want to spend time with people who value my company, not my checkbook. I want to pursue the interests I abandoned when I became solely defined by my role as a financial provider. I want to travel, learn, create, and contribute to causes that matter to me. And if your children never come around, if they never understand what you've done, the question would have terrified me 6 months earlier. But now I could answer it with clarity. Then I'll be sad about that. But I won't sacrifice my remaining years trying to buy their approval. I finally understand that love that has to be purchased isn't really love at all. When I returned to Chicago, I felt like a different person. The apartment that had felt like a prison of reduced circumstances now felt like a sanctuary of peace and possibility. The silence that had once frightened me now felt like the absence of chaos rather than the absence of love. I had learned to distinguish between being alone and being lonely, between solitude and abandonment, between self-care and selfishness. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. And freedom, I discovered, was not the absence of love. It was the presence of self-respect. 6 months later, I was sitting in the community center, where I now taught basic photography to other seniors, when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Grandma, this is Emma. I got your number from Tyler. I know things have been weird with the family, but I wanted to tell you that I got into Northwestern. I thought you should know." I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart catching in my throat. My granddaughter had reached out to me. Not for money, not because she'd been prompted by her parents, but to share good news. She'd thought I should know. I texted back, "Emma, I'm so proud of you. That's wonderful news. Would you like to meet for coffee sometime so you can tell me all about your plans?" Her response came quickly. "I'd really like that. I have a lot to say to you." We met the following Saturday at a small cafe near Northwestern's campus. Emma had grown into a poised young woman, but I could see traces of nervousness in the way she fidgeted with her coffee cup. "Grandma," she began, "I need to apologize to you." "Sweetheart, you don't owe me." "Yes, I do. I've had months to think about what happened, and I realize now that we treated you terribly. Not just Dad and Mom Sarah, but me and Jake too. We only called when we wanted something. We never asked how you were doing. We took you for granted." Her eyes filled with tears. "And the worst part is, we made you feel guilty for finally standing up for yourself. That's not okay." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Emma, you were a child. Children learn the patterns their parents teach them. But I'm not a child anymore. I'm 18 now, and I can see things more clearly. The way Dad always talked about you paying for things like it was just expected. The way Mom Sarah would coach us on what to say when we called you, it was manipulative, and it was wrong." She pulled out an envelope from her purse. "I want to show you something." Inside was a scholarship letter, full academic scholarship to Northwestern, covering tuition, room, and board. "I could have gone to that expensive robotics camp you didn't pay for," she said with a small smile. "But instead, I focused on my grades and my essays, and I earned this myself. It turns out I was capable of achieving things without your money. I just never had to try before." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt my own chest swell with pride for this remarkable young woman. "There's something else," she continued. "Dad and Jessica? They're getting divorced." The news hit me like a physical blow. "Oh, Emma, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, it's actually better this way. They spent so much time fighting about money, about the house, about who was responsible for what. Once your help stopped coming, all their financial problems became obvious, and they couldn't ignore them anymore." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Dad blamed you at first. He said you'd destroyed the family, but eventually even he had to admit that adults shouldn't need their elderly parents to pay their bills. How is he doing now? He moved into a smaller apartment, got a second job. He's learning to live within his means, I guess. It's been hard, but he's doing it. And Jake and I are proud of him for figuring it out instead of looking for someone else to bail him out." We talked for 2 hours, and Emma told me about her plans to study journalism, her interest in photography, sparked by seeing some of my pictures that Tyler had shared, and her hope that we could rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial obligation. I want to know you, Grandma, the real you, not just the person who wrote checks, but the woman who takes beautiful pictures and volunteers at the animal shelter and has opinions about books. Tyler told me about your photography class, and I want to hear about all of it. When we parted that day, I felt a piece of my heart that had been missing click back into place. 2 weeks later, Tyler and Emma both came to visit, and we spent the afternoon looking through my photography portfolio while I told them stories about the places and people I'd captured through my lens. They listened with genuine interest, asking questions about my techniques and the stories behind the images. Grandma, Tyler said, examining a black and white photo I'd taken of an elderly man feeding pigeons. You're really good at this. Have you thought about having an exhibition? The suggestion was so far beyond my imagination that I laughed. Oh, sweetheart, I'm just a beginner. No, you're not, Emma interrupted. These are beautiful. They tell stories. They make me feel things. Their encouragement planted a seed that grew over the following weeks. Mrs. Chen, my photography instructor, had been urging several of us to consider displaying our work at the community center's annual art fair. With my grandchildren's words echoing in my mind, I finally found the courage to submit 3 of my favorite photographs. To my amazement, all 3 were accepted, and 2 of them sold on the opening night of the exhibition. Standing next to my framed photographs, watching strangers pause to study my work, I felt a kind of validation I'd never experienced before. This was recognition for something I'd created, something that came from my own vision and skill, rather than my willingness to empty my bank account. Emma and Tyler both attended the opening, beaming with pride as they introduced me to their friends as my grandmother, the photographer. The months that followed brought changes I couldn't have imagined during those dark days when I'd felt invisible and used. The animal shelter offered me a paid part-time position coordinating their volunteer program. My photography skills led to a small business doing portrait sessions for other seniors who wanted professional photos to share with their families. Most surprisingly, I began dating. Harold was a widower I'd met in my book club, a retired engineer who shared my love of photography and had never once asked me for money. Our first date was a photography walk through Lincoln Park, and our conversations flowed as easily as if we'd known each other for years. Margaret, he said one evening as we watched the sunset from his back porch, you have such a quiet strength. I imagine you've weathered some storms to develop that kind of resilience. I told him my story, expecting judgment or pity, but instead finding understanding and respect. You know what impresses me most, he said. Not that you finally said no, but that you found the courage to say yes to yourself. On my 80th birthday, something miraculous happened. My phone rang throughout the day, not with requests for money, but with genuine birthday wishes. Emma called to sing happy birthday. Tyler stopped by with a small cactus he'd grown himself, knowing I'd mentioned wanting low-maintenance plants for my apartment. Helen and the book club ladies took me to lunch. Harold brought me flowers and a photography book I'd been wanting. Most surprisingly, Daniel called. Our conversation was awkward at first, stilted with months of hurt and misunderstanding. Mom, he said finally, I've been thinking about what you said, about how we only called when we needed something, about how we never asked how you were doing. Daniel, let me finish. I want to ask now. How are you doing, Mom? Really? The question, asked with genuine interest and no underlying agenda, brought tears to my eyes. I'm doing well, sweetheart. Better than I have in years. I'm glad. I know I have a lot to make up for. I know I can't undo the years of taking you for granted, but I'd like to try to have a real relationship with you, if you're willing. I'd like that too. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't a return to the old patterns of enablement, but it was a beginning. Even Sarah called, though our conversation was more difficult. She was still angry, still convinced that I'd been selfish and destructive, but she was also beginning to understand that her own children were watching how she treated their grandmother, and she didn't want them to learn that love was conditional on financial contributions. Maybe, she said before hanging up, we can try to do better. Maybe. It was more hope than I'd had in months. That evening, as I sat in my apartment surrounded by my photographs, my books, my small but meaningful possessions, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this place. The woman who had hung up on her son 8 months ago seemed like a stranger to me now, not because she was wrong, but because she had been so broken, so depleted, so convinced that her worth was measured only by what she could give away. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that love required bankruptcy, that being a good mother meant enabling bad decisions, that family loyalty flowed in only one direction. I thought about the thousands of dollars I'd given away while living on canned soup and clearance rack clothing, the dreams I'd deferred while funding other people's lifestyle choices. But I also thought about Emma's scholarship, Tyler's genuine interest in my photography, Daniel's tentative steps toward taking responsibility for his own life. Perhaps my refusal to continue enabling them had forced them to discover strengths they didn't know they possessed. The greatest gift I'd given my family, it turned out, wasn't money. It was the example of a woman who finally learned to value herself. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had silver hair and laugh lines, and the confident posture of someone who no longer apologized for taking up space in the world. She looked like someone who had learned the difference between love and exploitation, between generosity and enablement, between being needed and being valued. She looked like someone who had finally come home to herself. I thought about you, whoever you are, listening to this story. Have you ever found yourself in a similar place? Have you ever loved someone so much that you lost yourself in the process? Have you ever been made to feel guilty for having needs of your own? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between loving someone and loving yourself? If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that your worth isn't measured by what you can give away, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Maybe someone else needs to hear this message. Maybe someone else needs to know that it's never too late to choose yourself, because at the end of the day, the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with the person in the mirror. And that person deserves your love, your protection, and your respect, especially from you.